so while you're talking, I'm listening, I'm understanding, I'm also like fighting in my mind. And a lot of things are coming up. So you said, when you said Africa is the word, the name we were given, not what we are. So I'm thinking, I'm like, okay, so why do they call themselves white and call us black? Because white signifies purity and black signifies, you know.
We gotta decolonize that.
Because we're not black. This is brown. I've never seen, this is black. And I haven't seen a human that is black.
Yeah.
And they
Sure.
call themselves white. I've never seen a human being that is that color or that color.
Yeah.
So a lot of things are going on in my mind that most things is something that we're given, and most things they call themselves to is something that they make themselves to be.
That's right.
Wow, okay.
Talking about decolonizing our culture, right? Did you try to call me? You're a proud, independent black woman.
Is that we have conversations like this, sometimes terminology alters the perspective of the message that's attempted to be communicated.
Yes.
Because we all using these words, and everybody in here have these different definitions, right? So when you brought up religion, and we saying, and it did a great job. I'm not just adding to what you're saying. When you say we have to decolonize religion, and then you mentioned Christianity, for instance, right? So Christianity is the weapon of colonization. It's the colonization tool itself, not the subject to be colonized. You feel me? So like he's breaking when he's explaining the terminology of the name Esau, right? That itself is colonization itself, meaning to bring these people under this cultural idea, using the terms to redefine their experience. But when we have conversations like this, I mean, it's usually for the sake of time and how the conversation is framed. But that's the part that we don't really address sometimes. Right. And then everybody leave. Oh, bro, you know, we all inspired by the ideas that was communicated, but the depth of what that means in terms of its tangible application gets lost because the translation. We're not really using the same definition of the terms that we're using. So my point was, and it's a question as well, so you can elaborate a little bit more. The difference between Christianity in this context, and let's say what he mentioned about Islam or even Hebrewisms, is that we have to draw the line at one point and say, okay, well, religion based on not the repetitious, ritualistic behavior of a spiritual practice, but a culture. So when you talk about Hebrewisms, fundamentally, it's not religion. So whenever anybody here, the Hebrews, they think religion, but that's another religion, or Judah is not. See, so the Hebrewisms in its very nature, the language itself communicates a cultural expression versus when you say Christianity, which is a structured
a theology.
A theology. Mm-hmm. See, so the separation of those ideas alone then puts us in a whole nother way of applying what we're talking about.
That's how my group was actually
you see
right.
So it's good that you mentioned
that.
It's really
So certain things that are said, like since you mentioned Igbo, right? The Igbos have a way of life that's built out of a social experience, a historical evolutionary process.
Igbo is the culture, it is the language, it is the people.
Exactly.
Because you can't,
Culture,
yeah.
It is the language, it is the people. Christianity is not the language.
You can convert in and out. You can change. You can create a new version of it.
Islam is not the language, it is not the culture, it is not the people.
You know? Jewishism is not the language.
Right. Right.
Not Jewishism. Judaism is another thing altogether.
That's powerful. That's a very great point.
And so one thing I want to, a dynamic duo, huh?
That's a very good. Just real quickly, because I now know how people feel who might be connected to the word Jesus. I feel the same way about the word Africa. You know what I'm saying? I've heard that before, right? And then you got different thoughts about it. And Ani, I'm gonna pull for you for a minute because I don't know if it's Renuka Rashidi or if it's Dr. Umar Johnson, but somebody teaches the aspect of that general who Africa was supposedly named after, that it was actually that he was named after the place.
Okay.
So that's a discussion. And
It
that's
is a
something
discussion.
that's something that we need to go more into because I am connected to that word Africa. I really
Right. Well, so the word, interestingly enough, so that's a common thought that the name for Africa came from that general. But you can look up that general. The trick is you can look at the general and you can see that there are people before him who had that name. So that means that the name predated him.
Yeah.
Right? And so if the name predated him, then the concept predated him, had a whole nother meaning in a different context other than the name for a continent. So to be more exact than to just criticize it for being the name of a general, a better question is, where do we get this idea of continents from, and who named all of them?
Exactly.
Because who named all of them? Wait a second now. It's not the case that all of our, just think about that. It's not the case that all of our Igbo ancestors, or Fulani, or Yoruba, or whoever, Zulu, it's not the case that all of them have maps of continents, like world maps that showed the whole planet, right? So they didn't have that. So they didn't know, okay, I'm about to go from Africa into Asia, right? And I'm Asia, and I'm gonna go into this other Australia. And then wait a second, Antarctica is down there. And they all had this common shared language with the same definitions. They didn't have that. They had their local regions. They had their broader concepts. You see what I mean? The land over the river is called this because of those people over there. But this idea of global governance, right? And this idea of international dominion required the naming of continents for certain reasons. And it was the International Standardization Organization, right, ISO, which developed this global framework for developing a common metric system, common language, common ways to measure times. There's gonna be this amount of months, 24-hour days. They created these standards so that all over the world, everybody under European influence can have the same definitions of things. And if you go into the history of map making, it was a certain period in time when somebody said, North America, South America, we're gonna somehow call Europe its own continent because we want to, right? Australia gets to be a continent, India's a subcontinent, and that one there is gonna be called Africa. So it doesn't matter who it was, it's that we didn't name it that because we weren't in the meeting at that time to define the names for these continents. So when we go back to Eden, my last point is, when we go back to Eden, right, we're saying we can draw from our own cultural paradigms, from our own languages to refer to our own continent if we want to. We don't have to just borrow from theirs. You see what I mean? And use whatever is used on their maps. So if you noticed yesterday, Uchi, when you were in the banquet hall, what was the name of the museum presentation? Do you remember? The African
Edenic History.
Close. The African Edenic Heritage Museum. So you see that what we do is we identify the continent as Eden, going back to the idea that Eden is the land of humanity's origination. It's the land where the original people once had dominion over the earth and all of its resources, and in its natural, undecolonized state, it's paradise. So then we can use that term and apply it to the continent from our own language, just like how whatever language they drew it from, right? America was named after somebody, right? Whatever language they decide to draw from, that's their job. We're gonna go back to the African Edenic concept. You see what I mean? So.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much summed it up. I was just gonna say that the act of naming things isn't not a problem, because if you heard it kind of sounded like it in the beginning, but then it's the application of who named it and why it was named that way. So we just gotta take back, and what we've been taught is to have the power to define again.
That's
We
right.
gotta be able to define these things in our way, in our vision, in our worldview, versus somebody who just said whatever. I don't know where Africa came from. I don't know if what story is true. And to be honest with you, spending time trying to figure that out would just be a waste of time.
And that's exactly what I'm saying, that we don't know where it comes from, because
Right.
it means this here, it means that
Right.
there, whatever, you know.
Correct.
Because matter of fact, when you go into the continent, this is something that you're gonna, when you go in, an African is only an African outside of Africa. Inside of Africa, they're not an African.
That's true. That is.
So in Igbo, I'm Zulu, I'm showing them, I'm this, they're telling you who they are.
Right.
But in Africa, an African is not an African, only
Yeah.
outside of Africa, they're an African.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Naming and terminology is very important, and it's important to understand the origins so we can understand how we ended up where we are, okay? And to the question about religion, I just want us to consider, because we get in dialogues like this, and we're sometimes bound because when we make a statement or we say something, we have to explain it. And that explaining takes time, and that explaining has a lot of content. And then we have a lot of backgrounds and information and perspectives at the table. So it broadens the dialogue, and then it makes it harder to condense the dialogue to where what we're discussing becomes something tangible that we make motion on, okay? But in simple terms, religion has been established by man. You can do research for decades. Religions have been established by man. Our spirituality is our relationship and connection to the Creator. So we already allow God into the conversation. And that's really what the foundational understanding is that our spirituality is our relationship to God. And there are some absolutes about God, just like there are absolutes relative to us being able to say, well, the continent we're speaking about is Eden. Those are Edenic lands. And we have done the history and we can verify the information. And I'm just saying it so that we don't spend a lot of time on that, because we have some movement we have to take beyond that reality. That's simply a truth and a reality.
Powerful. Powerful.
Where were we? You know, I still gotta facilitate people finding their way here sometimes. So
Okay.
I'll be stepping out periodically. So everybody, round of applause for Yaziz. So we're dealing now with this idea of cultural decolonization as the first part of the presentation, but we want to shift gears now. Where's our? We'll be shifting gears soon, and I want to make a quick illustration of this idea of culture. And I'm gonna break it up into 3 stages. Nafar, be ready. We coming for you. So I don't need anybody criticizing my artistry skills, okay? That's not the point here. It's a concept I want to communicate. So this here, believe it or not, as hard as it might be to imagine, it's supposed to be a tree. Okay? And this is all the other stuff that, you know, the branches and whatnot, right? You got all of this fruit. So you see you got a tree, you got all of this fruit, and the tree is broken up into 3 layers. We're going to call this the culture tree. All right? The culture tree has 3 layers to it. What's this down here? What am I symbolizing down here? Roots. All right, just making sure I'm not too bad of an artist so they all know what I'm talking about. All right, so when most people think about culture, they think about the stuff that's up here. And what comes out, what's the produce of a tree? It's the fruit. They think about the fruit. And so the fruit of culture is things like your art. What else? Music. Name something else.
Food.
Clothing. What else?
Relationships.
Relationship. Oh, we're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. Let's keep going now. Language.
Food.
Yep. Language. Food.
Dance.
Close this out because there's a lot of stuff
Dance.
about culture. Dancing. You would say dance. MC Ham over there. MC Maccabees. What else?
Decor.
Decor. Maybe architecture.
Yeah, right.
Stories.
And we'll get to stories too. But let's think of another one.
You have education, yeah? No?
Let's pick something else. There's a reason why I'm picking what I'm picking.
Art, music, clothes, language.
Hair.
Day.
Hair. There we go. I'm going to have a conversation with black people. We ain't talking about hair. That's political. Okay, so these are the fruits of culture, right? These are things that emerge from the culture tree. But these here are the end results of something. Because we all know you don't just walk into a forest and you just see fruit flying and floating in the air. The fruit is connected to branches. The branches come from a trunk. The trunk grew out of some roots. So what is it that all of this emerges from? The fruit is the last stage of development, right? It's the last stage of development, and it comes from the trunk, right? So we'll say this is the middle layer. And this is where you get your things like your relationships, right? Because I heard that one before.
Governance.
Yep, this is where you get your systems of government.
Education.
This is where you get your educational institutions. I spelled government wrong, don't judge me.
Economics.
Yep. All of these things are the system that produces that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This grows out of that. This doesn't just happen.
Teach.
Institutions create this. People create this, and like clothing, factories, manufacturing, patterns, designs. Who created the fabric? Who wove it together? Who decided what color scheme represents this particular background? At the end result, you get the clothes. But before you get the clothes, it had to come through here, right? So we'll say the institutions.
That's powerful.
You see? So this is when the idea gets a little bit more concrete. This is also where your social norms exist. Right? What are social norms? Basically, it's your do's and don'ts. Right? How you relate to people, how you know, what we were talking about earlier when we talked about culture. Right? It said things like, you don't bring a boy, what was that, in the Igbo culture? No, in South Africa. It says you only get one chance to bring a man home. So you get one, after that, so if you're going to bring a man to me as the mom and the daddy, you get one chance to bring him home. That better be the man you marry. It ain't going to be this thing about, that's an institution. You see what I mean? That's a structure that supports all of this.
Yeah, because that's where marriage comes in this food.
Exactly.
Clothes,
Oh, right. So what else are we talking about here? We're talking about family systems.
That's right.
You see how the image of the trunk, the powerful foundation, the thing you can lean against, right? That's the system that supports all of the multifaceted developments here.
Tradition.
Right? Yeah, this is where your traditions live. And then those traditions can take numerous musical, clothing, linguistic forms over time. Those traditions can take a variety of forms, but this is just the middle layer. This ain't the bottom. What's on the bottom?
The milieu of the culture itself.
Roots. Ooh, fancy words. The roots.
Cultural heritage.
We got the, wait a second now. We got the roots on one side and the milieu of the culture itself. We're gonna go with roots. For the sake of the conversation. We're gonna say roots. And then, because the roots are the milieu of the culture itself. Now, I've never heard that word in a sentence. I've only read it, by the way. So you get 2 points for that. And confraternity. I've read it, but some words just come across every day. I appreciate that. So now we talk about the roots of culture. This is where it gets really deep, right? Because this is what all this other stuff emerges from. And this is your cosmology, your story about the origins of things. Where do we come from as a people? Who are we? Why were we created? Right? Are we accidental byproducts of an evolutionary experiment that was brought about by gases floating in the universe? Is that how we define ourselves culturally? Right? Are we like the people who are the bridge between monkeys and white people? Is that who we are culturally on the evolutionary ladder? That's not just a scientific theory. That's a political cosmology. That's a definition of the origins of things. So this is also where you get your sacred stories on the level of the roots. Right? This is where you get your sacred stories. This is where you get your spiritual systems. Yeah. This is the stuff that creates the experiences. This is what determines how you interpret the experiences. So 5 people can go through the same experience and interpret it differently based on how they were educated on this level.
That's right.
You see what I mean? Based on how they're educated at this level. So your spiritual systems. So why would we begin a Next Generation Summit during Georgia-Africa Connection? We're talking about culture, spirituality, tradition, because that's the roots. And when we look up, you can see that this builds the foundation for that, which builds the foundation for that. And most of the time when we talk about culture, we're only talking about this level. You see what I mean? We're only talking about this level. We're saying we're going to change our culture. We say American culture has invaded Africa. So let's change our food and make sure we keep eating our indigenous food. Let's change our decor. Let's change our architecture. All that's good. But the reason why we have those things is because the government implemented the foreign system. You see what I mean? The reason why we have those things is because the educational systems geared you to think in that manner. So you can change it on a surface layer, but it's still going to grow back. Does that make sense? Because it's still being fed from here. So this is why Asaf made a great point. He said Christianity was the colonization. You don't decolonize Christianity, you decolonize yourself, and the Christianity goes with it. And then you need what is your original interpretation? What is the African approach to understanding the scriptures? But not through the mind of King James, not through the mind of Constantine, not through the mind of whatever the name of your local missionary was. Any one of the 40,000 different denominations of Christianity. We're not going to go according to their definition, right? We need to go back and have an original point of view, and we got to start dealing with the issues on these levels. Then from there, we'll be able to build up. And this is when we realize we can simplify all of this to say that all of these things flow in a logical progression upwards. And as the scriptures say, you can be able to judge the tree by the fruit that it bears. So when we take a close examination of the music that's being played right now on the radio, right? The top Billboard charts. When you listen to the I don't know, Rihanna, who's another guy that's out right now? Roddy Ricch, Lil Baby. You listen to that, and what they're saying, when they talk about their women, and you hear the type of lyrics and what they're talking about when they talk about the sisters, that's the fruit of a social system. Right? A government which has licensed and legislated and mandated that it's okay to talk like that. Education where people have degrees and they've learned that it's okay to talk like that. You see what I mean? The social norms of how they interact with each other is as such where I feel like I should talk like that.
Business institutions.
The business institutions are capitalistically making money off of you talking like that. And then this guy who just wants to make some money fits inside of that social system as a tiny little twig, you know, at the edge of the engagement with no idea about this whole system that produced him.
He's just a sugar in the apple.
Exactly. Somebody have their hand up? Nope. So now we can then trace back the type of fruit that we're looking at to the system that produced it and the consciousness which developed the system. And then we can simplify this whole equation to understand that even before we had the roots, all we had was a little bitty seed. A seed, which is just an idea. The cultural seed from which all of these other systems emerged. And then we can simplify it and say that there are two different seeds. So these two different seeds, once you plant them, will grow roots, they'll develop trunks, they'll build branches and produce fruit, right? And the whole culture and civilization will emerge from the original seed. And what we've been building on in America, so you got these two different ideas. One is the African idea, or let's go ahead and redefine it, right? Go ahead and redefine it. One is the Edenic idea, and the other one is the European idea.
You can change that from degenerative to regenerative.
There we go. We take it even higher and say this is the regenerative idea. Matter of fact, let's continue doing this. Regenerative and degenerative. But let's take it a step further. What if one was life-giving?
The other one, anti-life.
And anti-life.
Organic and mutant.
Organic and GMO.
Yeah.
So now you see these two different systems as you continue to build on it, right? This one is holistic, and this one is compartmentalized and fragmented. This one is about complementing. This one is about competition. You build out this whole system in your mind, and you realize that that is what will eventually produce all of the rest. Make sense?
Yes.
So when we look at our cultural situation as a people, and we say, man, these dances is getting kind of crazy, right? This food system is killing us, right? The education, all these different things, we have to trace it back down to the roots and then understand that it's the product of a seed. And instead of trying to say, well, here we are in the next generation as the new leadership for the African Edenic world, and we simply want to take some of their stuff and put, like we want to staple our fruit to their tree. We want to leave that tree alone. We want to find a starting point and plant a seed and produce our own fruit. Because as the scriptures say, you don't go into the midst of thistles in search of figs. You don't go around thorn bushes looking for grapes. So if we continue to seek justice and righteousness and peace and mercy and all that stuff, you don't go to the old paradigm, right? You create a new mind. And with that new mind, you produce from your own seed. And that's the approach we have to take to culture. Now, any thoughts on that concept?
Very powerful. Should be a lot of thoughts.
For the sake of time,
Right. Okay, so we actually had a special guest just walk into the room, and I'd like to allow for him to introduce himself, a great friend of mine. And he'll be speaking for just a few minutes to give us some updates all the way from Nigeria. Please,
All right, my Niger brother.
All right, how's everyone doing?
Excellent.
I do apologize, I'm late, but I knew that was imparting knowledge to kind of prepare the way for me.
Absolutely.
All right, so my name is Shegun Adeyina. Where do I start? Actually, part of why I told him was I'm running for Gwinnett County School Board.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk about my journey, but I want to tell you where it's going to end up. And where it's going to end up is with all of us, right? We have to think of the future. What's the future going to look like for the black world? And I'm being very specific because I've been in this country since 1988.
Okay.
My parents, just like a lot of parents in Nigeria, understood the quality of an education. And during the time that I was getting an education in Nigeria, we had military rule. And the schools, because of military rule, the activists were the students. Students went out to the streets and they were against the government. They went out and protested, and they kept shutting down the schools. So we weren't getting an education. Like our parents before us, their situation was a little different. Pre-independence and post-independence for Nigeria, a lot of them traveled the world to go study and came back to come to our country. But now they were left with a new challenge. Send some of us abroad to come study. So I've been here since 1988. Went to school in University of Akron, Ohio, studied electrical engineering. And during my experience, I saw the lack of connection between black people. And I say that because we had preconceived ideas about who we are, about each other, kind of putting ourselves against each other, right? Whether you're from Nigeria, if you don't speak good English, or you're from America, you're not well educated. Those were the things, but we forgot the things that really motivated us. I know growing up, I used to watch a lot of TV, and I remember Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey. We watched on TV the things that made us proud. When we saw black people on TV, we got excited. And that motivated a lot of us to get where we are today. So what we need to do is, what is our strength as black people, right? Yes, there are other cultures out there, and I have no problem integrating with other cultures, but I think we have to appreciate and love ourselves first. We are diverse. There are two ways that we came here to this country, through slavery or through immigration. No one should ever say that those that came here as slaves, they're not immigrants. They were brought here against their will. But the sacrifices they made and the things that they did and the seeds that they planted opened opportunities for blacks from all over the world. So you see a lot of us come here to further our opportunities in life. We've done that. But now we need to do the reverse, because something is going on in Africa. There's a big change in Africa. And we all see the Chinese, the Lebanese, all cultures are rushing over there from a business perspective.
Yes.
Right? They're making investments. My dream one day would be blacks here as a community, we take our expertise and we go do the things, we go build the infrastructures in Africa. We go build the businesses in Africa, because there's a need. And it's not an accident I'm here speaking in Morehouse, one of the famous foundations of black knowledge in this country, where we can inspire some of the minds here to take what they've learned and let's look to the future. Don't just think of being an entrepreneur in America, but how about being an entrepreneur in Africa, where it's needed?
Right.
I just read last night, there was a young man in Kenya, engineer, who came up with an invention. He invented a device that's able to, it's like a glove that's able to help those who are dumb or deaf and dumb talk to you with voice. So even though they're using sign language, it's being interpreted with voice. He needs investors. He needs resources. We can be those resources and investors. Don't let someone else do it for us. So we have to start thinking in that mindset. Every major Fortune 500 company right now is in Africa. I know in Nigeria, Facebook, Google, you name it, they've invested a lot of money in Nigeria because they know Nigerians aspire a lot for education and empowering ourselves and knowledge, and they see the future too. So like they see the future, we should also see the future and see the positives about what we can do, the impacts we can make. And eventually our kids will have a much brighter future. So it's all about bringing, again, I love my people, I'm not being racist, but I think it's time for us as black people to step up and connect the dots. My mom's from the Caribbean, my dad's from Nigeria, they met in England, in Europe. But it's just seeing that culture come together is so empowering. And I know there's a lot of integration between our cultures here. So we need to first identify and appreciate each other. And then the next level is we need to invest in each other. So any questions or comments? Anything?
What are you currently doing here?
Great question. I was going to say, but I'm going to.
You said running for Gwinnett County.
Yeah. So I'm an IT consultant. I've been doing that. I've actually been in IT for over 25 years. My strength right now is my area of concentration, strategic planning and project and program management. But I try to apply it in everything I do, not just IT based. So we look ahead, we look at what the investment's going to be, and we kind of prepare the organization for the next steps. That's what I do for it. But while I'm running for school board, because I felt
Software wise?
Well, IT overall.
Okay.
So whether it's software or infrastructure, when you're doing strategic planning, that you look at the whole environment in its entirety, depending on what you're trying to do.
Is this a personal company of yours or are you partner?
Consulting. So I worked in corporate America for over 25 years. GM, some of the companies, GM, HP, currently consulting at Cisco. So yeah, I mean, in that state. And then also I'm an educator, taught at University of Phoenix and Wayne County Community College for 14 years. So, you can never have enough knowledge. And then taking your experience into the classroom is also powerful. Okay, any other comments, questions?
Well, I have a concern, and I just want to get your opinion on it. When you brought up the point of us taking certain businesses on the continent, and you mentioned Facebook, well, I know, like you all know, some of these businesses are not meant for us or even have any good for our people. So what are your concerns when it comes to certain businesses going over to Africa, creating the same situations that we have here?
Yeah. So, so one of the things that those businesses are able to do is bring opportunities to people on ground. I don't know if you know much about Nigeria. For those that have been, one of the challenges we have is the phone infrastructure. So when we had cell phones, that's one of the primary ways for us to communicate. So Facebook was a good tool for us to keep in touch, right? To identify people or community following each other. But what we have to do, we need to duplicate that. Now, there's a friend of mine that just created something called Bomalink.
Yes, I'm registered.
Registered also.
Yes, sir.
He was here earlier this week, Shola Salako.
Absolutely.
And he's taking that tool of what he's learned here now, and he's doing a Facebook Live, but he's focused on those who have African origin, right? And connecting us so it's going to be like the LinkedIn for Africans.
A Pan-African LinkedIn.
Yep.
And one of the special features about that, since you brought it up, is that it's also meant for African institutions who are looking to hire talent from the West to be able to find them. Because you register as a person here, right, who has an interest in going to Africa. So there might be an African corporation who needs top talent from the West. To reverse the brain drain, they need a database. And so that's the purpose. So it's not just about, I think the point about the concerns is, well, they're going to do what they do, and we can use it to the best of our ability with things like Facebook, but the ultimate goal is we create our own.
Yes.
Right.
Fruit from our own tree.
And we learn from those lessons, right? We saw
Right.
that some of the things they're doing, and we'll never do that. All right, any other comments or questions? Yes?
I just want to discuss, because you're talking about merging Africa and the US, and I want to say that going into fashion and like studying Nike, I noticed that in Africa, I reached out because I create clothes, and what I'm doing is creating a line of apparel that is athletic, but like kind of mirroring Nike, because I know that Nike is like a 36, but their net worth is 36.8 billion, I believe, for the year 2019. They employ 44,000 people, and so in my mind, I feel that if we can create an athletic line that is on the level of Nike or like better, but just African inspired and things like that, we can get there. And what I realized is when I was reaching out to like people in Africa, trying to like keep it within the Black community, I couldn't find anyone with a manufacturer company that could do what it is that I was looking for in Africa, so I had to go elsewhere. So I believe that just what you're saying about bringing those businesses and companies there, because it would have been great to like work with a manufacturer company that is out of Africa and create the clothing that's the vision that I'm trying to create and bring to life, like to partner and be able to do that, because everyone that's so far touched my project is with Black except for the manufacturer.
Okay.
So that is like a beautiful thing, and I think that it's.
And I appreciate you doing that, but one of the things you should do, like this weekend, there's a Nigerian Business Summit in Tampa, Florida, right? So you need to find events like that and go there and showcase what you have, because that event brings, business people from Nigeria. It brings people in government where you can network and start building your network. Because I think that's the most important place to start. Is once you start building that network. I mean, doing outreach online is one thing, but actually having a physical connection and someone sees what your vision is. So I'll share my card with you, and in fact, I'll give everyone my information. But those are the kind of events you need to be showcasing your stuff, and you will find, eventually when you build that network, you will find people that would find an interest in what you're doing and try to collaborate.
I think it would be a great opportunity for one of the latecomers to introduce herself and tell us what.
Ah.
Oh.
So it's gonna
I was going to add to your point, because we were faced with the same thing when we went to South Africa about 2 years ago, finding a manufacturer, and they directed us back to China. We were actually at several locations, and you're right, it's whites that's running them, and they directed us back to China.
Yeah, because we don't have the infrastructure, right? So manufacturing is mostly done in China for just about anything. So you find a lot of African products and goods being manufactured in China. I mean, we don't make anything, we import more than we create. Yeah.
And that needs to change.
Yeah, and that's what we need to do.
And we have to change.
Right? So we need to get the dollars here, get the expertise, take the team and say, okay, we're ready to do it. That's the only way we can do it. That's what China is doing. They provide the funding, they bring the companies. The worst part is they bring the workers, and not just the technological workers, they bring the laborers. So just imagine unemployment is going sky high in Africa right now because they're coming, they say, hey, we'll do your projects, we'll fund it, but guess what? The companies that are gonna do the work, we're gonna pay them, and they're Chinese companies. And guess what? The workers we have are our workers. We'll find a few people of your government officials, give them a little something. Yeah.
So then would you say that a big challenge for the next generation is to become not just the intellectuals, but the builders, the skilled people, the ones who have the ability to develop institutions and industries. And that's what we need to focus on with education. So if you run for school board in Gwinnett County, you want to help to facilitate that type of transformation in education to help our people become the head instead of the tail. Awesome. Well,
He just talked on my platform, right?
Yeah.
So life skills is one that's key for me. Discipline bias. We have a lot of discipline bias in our schools. We need to address that. We need to create a better environment for our kids to study in. We need to empower our teachers to do work. Make sure that our teachers are diverse, not just in their appearance, but also in their thinking. Because I think those are some of the challenges our teachers have, where you find a white teacher might look at something different than a black teacher would, right? So we have to educate them, and that's a key. So those are three things in my platform. I'm going to be working closely with him because we have to change our environment, not just for the black kids, but for the white kids and for the brown kids and for all the kids in the schools. And they all need access to a good education. And we can't change that if you have some of the same people that have been there. I mean, most of the board members, except for last year, we had the first black Democrat elected in Gwinnett County. But all the other board members, there's one that's been there since 1973 when it was created.
Wow.
Yeah, she's been there that long, and she's running again. And the district I'm running for, she's been there since 2004. And my thing, there should be term limits, so it allows opportunities for a diversity of ideas for them to grow. Yeah, so we're gonna do that. And I'm gonna pass my information out, because I know you have another speaker, and if you're willing to help out, volunteer, open, or just stay connected on things you're doing. So appreciate the time. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Because, as you know, the campaigns,
You gotta move.
I'm gonna move, change, go knock on
No
doors.
problem. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Artur?
One thought I wanted to share, and I'll go back to what my son said at the beginning